January 13, 1842. A sentry stands on the frozen walls of Jalalabad. His breath hangs in the air like smoke. He scans the white wasteland stretching toward the mountains. Nothing moves. Nothing has moved for days. Then he sees it, a dark shape against the snow, moving barely. He squints, rubs his eyes, looks again. A rider, slumped forward, clinging to a pony that staggers more than walks. Rider approaching. His voice cracks the silence like a gunshot. Officers scramble up the ramparts. Telescopes swing toward the horizon. General Sir Robert Sale pushes through the crowd. He raises his glass, studies the figure. The pony's ribs show through its hide. The rider's uniform is black with frozen blood. One arm hangs limp. The other grips the saddle like a drowning man grips driftwood. Open the gates. Soldiers sprint across the snow. Their boots punch through the crust. They reach the rider just as he slides from the saddle. He falls face first into the drift. Sale kneels beside him, turns him over. The face is destroyed. Frostbite has taken his nose. His ears are black. Powder burns mark his cheeks like craters on the moon. His eyes flutter open. Empty. Staring at something no one else can see. Sale grabs his collar, pulls him close. Where is the column? Where is Elphinstone? Where are the troops? The man's lips crack as he tries to speak. Blood seeps from the corners of his mouth. His voice comes out as a whisper, a rasp, barely human. I am the column. Sale freezes. His grip tightens. What did you say? The man's eyes focus for one moment. One single moment of terrible clarity. I am the army. His name was Dr. William Brydon, assistant surgeon, Army of the Indus. 7 days earlier, he marched out of Kabul with 16,500 people. Soldiers, wives, children, servants, merchants. A column stretching for miles across the valley floor. Now he lay in the snow, alone, the last one breathing. 16,500 people entered those mountain passes. One came out. This is not a battle. This is not a defeat. This is an erasure, a vanishing, as if 16,499 human beings simply dissolved into the frozen air. And here is what makes this story different from anything you have heard before. The British knew it was coming. They were warned, multiple times, by multiple people. They ignored every warning. They made every wrong choice. They trusted every wrong person. This disaster was not bad luck. It was not weather. It was not the enemy. It was arrogance, pure and simple. The belief that an empire cannot fall, that soldiers cannot freeze, that foreign lands will bend to foreign flags. The mountains taught them otherwise. But here is the part no one tells you. Britain was not supposed to survive. Not because of the cold. Not because of the enemy fighters. He was supposed to die in the final pass. A sword swung at his skull. A blade meant to split his head in two. It didn't. And the reason it didn't? The reason one man walked out of a massacre that claimed 16,499 others? A magazine pouch. A small leather ammunition case. He had stuffed it inside his hat, trying to keep his head warm. When the sword came down, the blade hit leather instead of bone. That is the difference between Dr. William Brydon and 16,499 corpses rotting in the Afghan snow. Piece of leather, 3 inches thick, stuffed in a hat. We will come back to that moment. You will see exactly how it happened. But first, you need to understand how 16,500 people walked into a trap that everyone saw coming. Before we go deeper into this story, I want to know something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Your city, your country, wherever you are in the world. I read every single comment, and I want to see how far this story travels. How many corners of the world are learning about the 16,500 who never made it home? So drop your location. And if this story grips you the way it gripped me when I first discovered it, hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves history. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this channel digs up the truths that time tried to bury. And this is just the beginning. Now, back to the snow, back to the blood, Back to the moment when an empire discovered it was not invincible. Let me tell you what Brydon saw in those 7 days. Let me tell you what dying sounds like when it happens to 16,500 people at once. The column left Kabul on January 6, 1842. A cold, clear morning. Snow on the ground but not falling. The mountains rising white and silent in the distance. They should have left months earlier. In autumn when the passes were clear. When the weather was survivable. But they delayed. Negotiations, arguments, indecision. A commander who could not make a choice to save his own life, let alone the lives of those under his command. So they left in January. The worst possible time. The most dangerous season. When the passes fill with snow 20 feet deep. When the wind cuts through wool like a blade through water. 4,500 soldiers marched that morning. British infantry, Indian sepoys, cavalry without enough horses, artillery without enough ammunition. Behind them came 12,000 camp followers. Wives of officers wrapped in furs, carried in covered litters. Wives of soldiers walking in thin shoes, carrying infants against their chests. Servants, cooks, merchants who had followed the army to sell goods. Children born in Kabul who had never seen any other home. And the baggage. Camels loaded with silver plate. Wagons creaking under the weight of Persian rugs. Crystal glasses wrapped in silk. An officer's personal wine collection. A piano. They packed for a parade. They were marching into a massacre. Here is the first thing you need to understand. The British were not fighting an army. They were fighting a land. Afghanistan is not a country the way you think of countries. It is a collection of valleys, mountain ranges, tribal territories that have resisted every invader for 3,000 years. Alexander the Great marched through. He left. The Mongols swept down from the north. They left. The Persians claimed it. They could not hold it. And in 1842 the British believed they were different. They believed their guns were better. Their discipline stronger. Their God on their side. They were about to learn what every invader learns in Afghanistan. The mountains do not care about your guns. The cold does not fear your discipline. And God, if He watches at all, seems to favor the people who know how to survive in hell. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. The British were not supposed to be retreating. They were supposed to be in control. Just 2 years earlier they had conquered Kabul. They had installed their own king on the throne. They had built a comfortable cantonment outside the city walls. Officers played polo. Wives hosted dinner parties. Children learned to ride ponies in the Afghan dust. For 2 years they lived as if Afghanistan had been tamed. As if the war was over. As if the people surrounding them, watching them, had accepted defeat. They had not. Beneath the surface hatred was building. In the mosques, mullahs preached against the foreigners. In the mountain villages, tribal chiefs sharpened their knives. In the city itself, men who smiled at British officers by day plotted their deaths by night. The British saw none of it. Or they saw it and did not care. They believed what empires always believe. That they were too powerful to fall. That their enemies were too primitive to organize. That their situation was difficult but manageable. They were wrong about everything. What you are about to witness is not a story of heroic defeat. This is not Thermopylae. This is not the Alamo. This is a study in failure. Leadership failure. Intelligence failure. Cultural failure. Every mistake that a powerful nation can make, the British made in Afghanistan between 1839 and 1842. And the cost was paid not by the generals who escaped to write their memoirs. The cost was paid by soldiers who followed orders. By wives who followed husbands. By children who had no choice at all. I want you to remember that as we go forward. 16,500 is not a number. It is a weight. And by the end of this story you will feel it. Now, the question you should be asking, how did it come to this? How did the greatest military power on earth find itself trapped in a frozen valley, surrounded by enemies, led by a commander who could not command? The answer begins 3 years before the retreat. In a room far from Afghanistan, where men who had never seen the Hindu Kush decided they knew how to control it. The answer begins with fear, greed, and a map. In 1839, the British looked north from India and saw a threat, a shadow creeping down from Russia, and they decided to do something about it. What they did next would set 16,500 people on a road to death. But here is the part that should haunt you. The warning signs were everywhere. One man saw them clearly. His name was Alexander Burns. He spoke the language. He wore the clothes. He understood the culture. He told his superiors, "This will not hold. The Afghans will not accept a puppet king. The tribes will not stay quiet. If you push them, they will push back. And you will not survive the pushback." They ignored him. 2 years later, a mob would tear Alexander Burns apart. They would drag his body through the streets of Kabul. They would hang pieces of him from the city gates. And the British would still not understand what they had done. That story is next. The invasion. The arrogance. The moment when an empire walked into a trap of its own making. Stay with me. To understand how 16,500 people walked into a frozen grave, you need to understand what brought them to Afghanistan in the first place. It was not heroism. It was not liberation. It was not even conquest for its own sake. It was fear. In 1839, the British East India Company controlled India. Millions of square miles. Hundreds of millions of people. The jewel of the empire. The source of unimaginable wealth. Cotton. Spices. Opium. Everything flowed through India. And the men in London would do anything to protect it. Anything. Including invading a country they did not understand. Installing a king nobody wanted. And stationing an army in a land that had destroyed every invader for 3,000 years. But here is the part that explains everything that followed. The British were not afraid of Afghanistan. They were afraid of Russia. The Russian Empire was expanding, pushing south. Year after year, the Tsar's army swallowed territory. Persia was falling under Russian influence. The Khanates of Central Asia trembled. And British strategists looked at their maps and saw a nightmare taking shape. A straight line. From Moscow to India. Through Afghanistan. They called it the Great Game. A shadow war. No armies clashing in open fields. Instead, spies, diplomats, bribes, assassinations, maps redrawn in secret rooms, influence traded like currency. The goal was simple. Keep Russia away from India. Build a wall of buffer states. Control the mountain passes before the enemy could. And Afghanistan sat right in the middle. The British looked at the Hindu Kush and saw a gate. If Russia controlled that gate, India was vulnerable. If Britain controlled it, India was safe. At least that was the theory. The reality was something else entirely. Here is what the strategists in London failed to understand. Afghanistan was not a gate. It was not a buffer. It was not a chess piece waiting to be moved. Afghanistan was a graveyard. The Persians had learned this. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire, died fighting Afghan tribes. Alexander the Great marched through and lost thousands in the mountain passes. The Mongols swept down from the north and found a land that refused to stay conquered. The Mughals claimed it. They could never hold it. Every empire that entered Afghanistan left weaker than it arrived. But the British believed they were different. They had better weapons, better training, better organization. They had conquered India. They had defeated Napoleon's allies. They ruled a quarter of the world. What could a collection of mountain tribes do against the greatest empire in human history? The mountains were about to answer that question. The plan was elegant in its arrogance. Dost Muhammad Khan ruled Afghanistan in 1839. He was not a king in the European sense. He was an emir, a chief among chiefs. His power depended on balancing tribal alliances, keeping the warlords satisfied, maintaining respect through strength and cunning. The British did not like Dost Muhammad. He was too independent, too unpredictable. He had been talking to Russian agents, receiving letters from the Tsar. Maybe he was playing both sides. Maybe he was simply hedging his bets. It did not matter. The British decided he had to go. In his place they would install Shah Shuja. Shah Shuja was an Afghan king. Or rather, he had been. 20 years earlier he ruled in Kabul. Then he was overthrown. He fled to India. For 2 decades he lived in comfortable exile on British money, waiting, hoping, growing old while others ruled his homeland. Now the British would put him back on the throne. He would be grateful. He would be loyal. He would be controllable. That was the theory. The reality? Shah Shuja was a puppet. Everyone knew it. The Afghans knew it most of all. Lord Auckland was the Governor-General of India. The decision landed on his desk. Invade Afghanistan. Remove Dost Muhammad. Install Shah Shuja. Secure the passes. Block the Russians. Auckland had never been to Afghanistan. He had never met an Afghan. He relied on reports from men who told him what he wanted to hear. The invasion will be easy, they said. The Afghans will welcome Shah Shuja. Dost Muhammad has no support. A show of force and the whole country will fall into line. Auckland believed them. In December 1838, he issued the Simla Manifesto. It declared that Shah Shuja was the rightful king of Afghanistan, that the British were simply helping him reclaim his throne, that this was liberation, not conquest. Nobody was fooled. The army of the Indus assembled. 21,000 soldiers, British infantry, Indian sepoys, cavalry, artillery, engineers, the finest military force in Asia. Behind them came 38,000 camp followers, servants, cooks, merchants, families, livestock, wagons, a moving city crawling across the subcontinent. The force stretched for miles, a river of red coats and brown faces flowing toward the mountains. They marched with confidence, with banners flying, with regimental bands playing. They believed they were unstoppable. But here is the part that should have warned them. Before they reached Afghanistan, the dying had already begun. The Bolan Pass, a narrow corridor through the mountains on the approach to Kandahar. 60 miles of rock and dust, water scarce, shade non-existent. The army entered in spring. Temperatures climbed above 100 degrees. Men marched in wool uniforms designed for English rain. Canteens ran dry. Horses collapsed. Camels died by the hundreds. Then came the cholera. It swept through the camp followers first. Servants who drank from stagnant pools. Merchants who ate spoiled food. Within days it spread to the soldiers. Men who had been healthy at dawn were dead by sunset. Their bodies left beside the trail. No time to bury them. Thousands died before they even saw an Afghan fighter. The army pressed on. They had no choice. Retreat would mean humiliation, failure, the end of careers. So they marched over the bodies of their own, toward a war that had not yet begun, toward a disaster that was still 3 years away. Kandahar fell without a fight. The local chiefs saw the size of the British force and calculated their odds. They opened the gates, smiled at the invaders, waited. Shah Shuja entered the city in triumph. Crowds lined the streets. Some cheered. Most watched in silence. The British told themselves this was victory. They did not notice the eyes. Cold, watchful, patient. The army rested, resupplied, then pushed north toward the real prize, Ghazni. The fortress of Ghazni sat on a hill overlooking the road to Kabul. Massive walls, ancient defenses, a garrison loyal to Dost Muhammad. The British studied the fortress and saw a problem. Their artillery was too light, the walls too thick. A siege could take months. Then came a stroke of luck, or so they thought. An Afghan informer revealed a weakness. One gate, the Kabul gate. Its defenses were incomplete. A determined assault could break through. On July 23, 1839, British engineers crept forward in darkness. They planted explosives at the base of the gate. At dawn, the charges blew. Stone and timber exploded outward. Before the dust settled, British infantry charged through the gap. The fighting was brutal. Room to room, blade to blade. Afghan defenders fought with swords and jaziles. British soldiers with bayonets and muskets. By afternoon, the fortress had fallen. The British flag flew from the walls. The victory seemed total. The path to Kabul lay open. What the British did not understand was simple. They had won a battle. They had not won a war. And in Afghanistan, battles mean nothing. Only survival matters. August 1839, Kabul. Dost Muhammad saw the writing on the wall. His allies were deserting. His treasury was empty. The British were coming with overwhelming force. He fled into the mountains, disappeared into the Hindu Kush, a fugitive in his own land. Shah Shuja entered Kabul in triumph. This time the British made sure the crowds cheered. They paid for it. Silver coins distributed to anyone who would wave and smile. The new king took his throne. British officers congratulated themselves. The campaign had succeeded. Afghanistan was secure. The Russian threat neutralized. Dispatches raced back to London. Auckland received praise. Medals were distributed. Promotions granted. The empire celebrated another easy conquest. Nobody mentioned the Bolan Pass. Nobody counted the cholera dead. Nobody asked what the Afghans really thought of their new king. The occupation had begun. For 2 years the British lived in a fantasy. They built a cantonment outside Kabul. A sprawling compound. Barracks. Officers' quarters. Stables. Parade grounds. A little piece of England transplanted into the Afghan plateau. Officers brought their wives, their children, their furniture, their servants. Life in the cantonment resembled a country estate more than a military outpost. There were polo matches, garden parties, amateur theatrical performances. Officers wrote letters home describing the pleasant climate, the beautiful mountains, the quaint local customs. Dr. William Brydon arrived in 1840, fresh from England, young, eager, ready to serve. He took up his post as assistant surgeon, treated the usual ailments, dysentery, frostbite, fever. The occasional dueling wound when tempers flared. Life seemed calm, manageable, even boring. But beneath the surface, pressure was building. The British made every mistake an occupying power can make. First, they cut the subsidies. For generations, Afghan tribal chiefs had received payments to keep the mountain passes open. It was how business worked. You paid for safe passage. The chiefs kept their fighters in line. The British decided these payments were too expensive, wasteful, unnecessary. After all, they had won. Why keep paying defeated enemies? So they stopped the money. The chiefs noticed. They remembered. Second, the soldiers caused problems. Young men far from home, bored, restless. Some sought entertainment in the city. Some formed relationships with Afghan women. In Afghan culture, this was unforgivable. A matter of honor. Blood feuds erupted. Families demanded vengeance. British commanders dismissed these incidents as minor, local disputes. Nothing to worry about. They were wrong. Third, Shah Shuja proved useless. The king the British installed had no real power. Everyone knew he was a puppet. His court was a joke. His authority extended only as far as British bayonets could reach. The mullahs preached against him in the mosques. The tribal chiefs mocked him in their councils. The common people saw him as a traitor, a foreigner's dog. Hatred grew, quietly, steadily, like water rising behind a dam. And there was one man who saw it all clearly: Alexander Burnes. He was not a typical British officer. He spoke Pashto fluently. He dressed in Afghan clothes. He had traveled through Afghanistan years before the invasion. He understood the culture in ways his colleagues never would. Burnes warned his superiors. "The situation is not stable," he wrote. "The people hate Shah Shuja. The chiefs are angry about the subsidies. The tribes are arming themselves. If we do not change course, there will be an explosion." His warnings were filed away, ignored, dismissed as alarmism. Burnes was too valuable to send home. He knew too much, so they kept him in Kabul. Gave him a comfortable residence in the city. Let him continue his work. They thought they were using him. They did not realize they were leaving him exposed. November 1841 was coming, and Alexander Burnes would be the first to die. November 2nd, 1841, Kabul. Alexander Burnes woke to the sound of shouting. He rose from his bed, walked to the window, looked out at the street below. A crowd was gathering, dozens of men, then hundreds. They carried weapons, swords, knives, jaziles slung over shoulders. Their voices rose in a chant he could not quite make out. Burnes was not alarmed. Not at first. Crowds gathered often in Kabul. Markets drew people. Disputes erupted. Usually meant nothing. He sent a messenger to the cantonment. Requested troops. Just in case. Then he went about his morning routine. Breakfast. Correspondence. The business of empire. The messenger never arrived. The crowd grew. Word spread through the city. The foreigner's agent. The spy. The one who speaks our language and wears our clothes. He is here. In that house. By mid-morning, 1,000 men surrounded Burns' residence. Their chants became clearer. Death to the foreigners. Death to the puppet king. Death to the man who betrayed us. Burns finally understood. This was not a dispute. This was an uprising. He appeared on his balcony. Raised his hands. Tried to speak. He knew the words. He knew the customs. He believed he could reason with them. Someone threw a stone. It struck the wall beside his head. Burns retreated inside. Barricaded the doors. His small guard, a handful of sepoys, took positions at the windows. The attack began. They came through the doors. Through the windows. Through holes smashed in the walls. The sepoys fought. They killed attackers. They were overwhelmed by numbers. One by one they fell. Burns' brother was with him. William Burns. A civilian. He died in the hallway. Hacked down by swords. Alexander Burns made it to the garden. He tried to climb the wall. Tried to escape into the neighboring streets. They caught him. What happened next was savage. Burns was beaten. Stabbed. His body torn apart by the mob. They dragged what remained through the streets of Kabul. Paraded their trophy through the bazaars. His head ended up on a pike. Displayed at the city gates. The man who warned the British. The man who understood Afghanistan. The man who tried to prevent disaster. He was the first to die. Here is what happened next. Or rather, what did not happen. The British cantonment sat 2 miles away. Officers heard the gunfire. They saw the smoke rising from the city. They received fragmented reports. Burns is under attack. Burns needs help. They did nothing. General William Elphinstone commanded the garrison. He was 59 years old. Sick with gout. His joints swelled so badly he could barely walk. His mind moved even slower than his body. Elphinstone called a meeting. Officers gathered. They debated. They discussed. They considered options. Hours passed. The sun crossed the sky. Evening came. By the time they decided to act, Burns was already dead. His blood had dried in the Kabul dust. His body had been scattered across the city. The British had shown their weakness. And the Afghans had noticed. But here is the part that turned a crisis into a catastrophe. Elphinstone should never have been in command. Everyone knew it. Even Elphinstone knew it. He had been appointed because he was safe. A gentleman. Well-connected. Unlikely to cause political problems. His military reputation rested on a single battle. Waterloo, fought 26 years earlier. He had been a junior officer then. Brave enough. Competent enough. But that was a different man. A younger man. A healthy man. The Elphinstone who commanded in Kabul was a shadow. His body failing. His mind foggy. His confidence shattered. When he received orders to take command in Afghanistan, he tried to refuse. He wrote to his superiors. He explained his health problems. He begged them to send someone else. They insisted. Orders were orders. He went. Now 16,500 lives depended on a man who could not make a decision. The uprising spread. After Burns fell, the chiefs smelled blood. Tribal fighters poured down from the mountains. They surrounded the cantonment. Cut supply lines. Sniped at anyone who showed themselves on the walls. The British commissary, their food storage, sat in a separate compound. Indefensible. Isolated. Within days, Afghan fighters seized it. Now the garrison was surrounded and starving. Elphinstone called more meetings. His officers argued. Some demanded attack. Strike now. Hit them hard. Show strength. Brigadier John Shelton was the loudest voice for action. A hard man. A fighter. He despised Elphinstone. Made no secret of it. He wanted to lead sorties. Burn the enemy camps. Take the fight to the Afghans. Elphinstone listened. Nodded. wrung his hands, called for more discussion. Days passed. The situation worsened. Nothing was decided. "We must do something," Shelton raged. Yes, Elphinstone replied. "But what?" "We must consider all options." The considering never ended. The doing never began. Meanwhile, a new player took center stage. Akbar Khan. He was the son of Dost Muhammad, the king the British had deposed. Young, charismatic, ruthless. He had been fighting in the mountains since his father's fall, building alliances, gathering fighters, waiting for his moment. Now his moment had arrived. Akbar positioned himself as the leader of the uprising. The chiefs followed him, not out of love, out of calculation. He was Dost Muhammad's heir. He had legitimacy, and he had a plan. His plan was simple. Let the British destroy themselves. No frontal assaults on the cantonment. No costly battles. Just pressure. Constant, grinding pressure. Cut their food. Kill their sentries. Let cold and hunger do the work. And when they were desperate enough, offer them a deal. Sir William Macnaghten was the senior British political officer. With Burns dead, responsibility fell on him. Macnaghten was not a soldier. He was a diplomat, a negotiator, a man who believed that every problem had a solution if you found the right words, the right offer, the right bribe. He opened talks with Akbar Khan. The meetings took place under flags of truce. Macnaghten rode out with a small escort. Akbar met him with smiles and assurances. They negotiated. Akbar's demands were straightforward. The British must leave Afghanistan. Immediately. Shah Shuja could stay or go, it did not matter. Dost Muhammad would return from exile. In exchange, the tribes would allow safe passage to Jalalabad. Macnaghten agreed in principle. What choice did he have? The garrison was starving. Disease was spreading. Every day brought more deaths. But Macnaghten could not accept defeat so easily. He was a proud man. A clever man. Too clever. He began plotting. Here is where treachery met treachery. Macnaghten decided to betray Akbar. He sent secret messages to rival chiefs. He offered money, power, British support against Akbar. The plan was to split the Afghan alliance, turn the chiefs against each other. By time, maybe even salvage the situation. It was a desperate gamble, and it failed completely. One of the chiefs Macnaghten approached was loyal to Akbar. He showed Akbar the letters, revealed the plot. Akbar Khan was not surprised. He had expected something like this. The British always schemed. It was their nature. But now he had justification. Now he had an excuse. He invited Macnaghten to one more meeting. December 23, 1841. A spot near the cantonment. To finalize the agreement. To seal the peace. Macnaghten agreed. He brought a small escort. He believed he was walking toward a diplomatic triumph. He was walking toward his death. The meeting began normally. Pleasantries exchanged. Tea offered. Akbar smiled. Macnaghten smiled back. Then Akbar gave a signal. Men seized Macnaghten, grabbed his arms, forced him to his knees. Akbar drew a pistol. The same pistol he would later claim that Macnaghten had given him as a gift during earlier negotiations. He pressed it to Macnaghten's chest, pulled the trigger. Macnaghten fell, still alive, wounded. Akbar's men finished the work. They hacked at the body, severed the head, severed the limbs. They dragged the pieces through Kabul, displayed them in the bazaar. Macnaghten's hand, the hand that signed treaties, that wrote schemes, was nailed to a post in the market square. The message was clear. There would be no more negotiations, no more British tricks. Only one option remained: retreat. Elphinstone received the news. His last hope for a diplomatic solution was dead, literally in pieces in a Kabul market. Now he faced a choice he could not avoid: stay and die. The garrison could not hold out much longer. Food was gone, ammunition running low. The men were freezing in summer tents never meant for Afghan winters. Fight and die. A breakout assault might work, but against how many? Tens of thousands of fighters held the heights. The cantonment sat in a depression, attacking uphill into withering fire. Or leave. Accept Akbar's terms. Trust his promise of safe passage. March to Jalalabad, 90 miles through the most dangerous terrain on earth. In January, Elphinstone chose to leave. But here is the detail that sealed 16,500 fates. Akbar Khan made promises. Safe passage. Food along the way. No attacks. In exchange, the British would surrender most of their weapons. Leave behind their cannons. Give up hostages as guarantees. Elphinstone agreed. He handed over guns. He handed over officers' wives as hostages. He trusted Akbar's word. He had no leverage, no strength, no options. He was negotiating from total weakness. And Akbar knew it. The terms were a death sentence wrapped in diplomatic language. Elphinstone either did not see it or could not face it. On January 6, 1842, the retreat began. The morning was cold, clear. Snow blanketed the ground but had stopped falling. 16,500 people assembled. Soldiers formed columns. Camp followers gathered their belongings. Women clutched children. Servants led pack animals. The procession stretched for miles. Slow, disorganized, vulnerable. They had 90 miles to cover. 5 mountain passes to cross. 1 week of marching if everything went well. Nothing would go well. The Afghans watched from the hills. Akbar Khan watched. He had made his promises. He had no intention of keeping them. The British marched out of Kabul. Behind them, the city they had occupied for 2 years. Ahead, the White Mountains where 16,499 of them would die. Dr. William Brydon marched with them. His surgeon's bag over his shoulder. His faith in his commanders not yet broken. 7 days later, he would ride into Jalalabad alone. The last survivor. The final witness. But that moment was still ahead. First came the passes. First came the dying. The trap had closed. The only question now was how long the killing would take. January 6, 1842. Dawn. The gates of the cantonment opened. The column began to move. 4,500 soldiers. 12,000 camp followers. Horses. Camels. Wagons loaded with supplies that would never be eaten. Families who would never see home again. They walked into a white silence. Snow covered everything. The mountains rose ahead like teeth. The sky hung low and gray. Dr. William Brydon rode near the middle of the column. His breath frosted in the air. His fingers already numb inside his gloves. Around him, sepoys marched with their heads down. Officers shouted orders that nobody followed. The organization collapsed within the first hour. Camp followers pushed past soldiers. Wagons blocked the road. Camels panicked and scattered. The column stretched and broke into fragments. What should have been a military formation became a shuffling mob. By midday they had covered 5 miles. 90 miles remained. The first night killed more than any battle would. They stopped as darkness fell. No tents. Elphinstone had ordered them left behind to speed the march. No fires. Fuel was scarce and discipline had evaporated. The temperature dropped below freezing, then kept dropping. Men sat in the snow. Some wrapped themselves in blankets. Most had nothing. Sepoys from the plains of India, men who had never experienced cold like this, huddled together for warmth. It was not enough. By morning, hundreds had frozen where they sat. Brydon walked through the camp at dawn. Bodies everywhere. Some looked peaceful. Sleep. Others had faces twisted in agony. Fingers clawed at the snow. The living stepped over the dead. There was no time to bury them. No energy to mourn. The column moved again. Smaller now. Weaker. And the passes still lay ahead. But here is what made the dying so much worse. The Afghans were watching. From the ridges above. From the rocks on either side. Hundreds of fighters. Then thousands. Ghilzai tribesmen with jaziles, long-barreled rifles accurate at distances the British muskets could not match. They did not attack. Not yet. They waited. Akbar Khan had given orders. Let them march. Let them freeze. Let them starve. When they are weak enough, we finish them. The column crawled forward. Every mile brought more death. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, ears, noses. Men who fell behind disappeared. Screams echoed from the rear. Then silence. The stragglers were being taken, killed, stripped of anything valuable. The main column could not help them, could not even slow down. Stopping meant dying. So they kept walking. Into the white, into the cold, into the passes that would become their graves. January 8, 1842. Kabul Pass. This was the first true test. A narrow defile, 5 miles long. Walls of rock rising on both sides. A frozen stream running through the middle. One way in, one way out. No room to maneuver. The perfect killing ground. The column entered the pass in the early morning. Snow had drifted deep in the narrow sections. Men waded through drifts up to their waists. Horses stumbled and fell. Wagons became stuck. Then the shooting started. The first shots came from above. Missiles cracking in the cold air. Soldiers fell, screaming, clutching wounds. The British looked up. They saw nothing. Just rocks, snow, puffs of smoke appearing and vanishing. Return fire was useless. The muskets could not reach. The Afghans were too high, too hidden, too patient. They fired down into the packed column like hunters shooting fish in a barrel. Brydon worked frantically. His hands were numb. His instruments were frozen. He cauterized wounds with a heated blade, amputated shattered limbs with a saw, tied off arteries with strips of cloth torn from the dead. He saved who he could. There were not enough hours, not enough hands, not enough hope. The column pushed forward. There was no other option. To stop was to die. To retreat was impossible. Bodies piled in the snow, some still moving, reaching out, calling for help. Nobody stopped. A woman stumbled past Brydon. She carried an infant wrapped in a shawl. The baby was silent, too silent. Brydon looked closer. The child was blue, frozen, dead for hours. The mother did not know, or could not accept it. She kept walking, clutching her dead child, whispering words Brydon could not hear. He saw this again and again. Mothers carrying children who would never wake. Wives dragging husbands who could no longer stand. Soldiers helping comrades whose wounds would kill them within hours. The column had become a procession of the dying helping the doomed. And still the missiles cracked from above. Still the bodies fell. Still the snow turned red. By evening they emerged from the Kabul Pass. Behind them the defile was choked with corpses. Hundreds, maybe 1,000. Impossible to count. Elphinstone called a halt. What remained of his staff gathered around him. The general sat on a horse he could barely control. His face was gray, his eyes empty. He asked for options. Nobody had any. Brigadier Shelton raged. "We must fight," he demanded. "Form squares. Fix bayonets. Charge the heights." Elphinstone nodded. Yes, perhaps tomorrow. We must rest now." Tomorrow came. No attack was ordered. The dying continued. Here is what broke the column completely. Elphinstone sent word to Akbar Khan. More negotiations. More desperate pleas. Akbar replied with an offer. "Send me hostages. Officers. Their wives. In exchange, I will provide safe conduct through the remaining passes." Elphinstone agreed. He had agreed to everything. He would agree to anything. Officers were selected. Wives volunteered. Lady Florentia Sale among them. Her husband commanded the garrison at Jalalabad, the very place they were trying to reach. She left the column with dignity. Her diary survived. It recorded everything. The snow was knee-deep. The cold beyond description. Children died in their mothers' arms. Men who sat down to rest never rose again. She watched from captivity as the army that was supposed to protect her walked into annihilation. The hostages were taken to Afghan camps. Federal sheltered. Kept alive. The column received nothing in return. No food. No protection. No mercy. Akbar's promises dissolved like snow in blood. January 9th and 10th. The dying accelerated. The column no longer resembled a military force. It was a mob. A herd of desperate animals stumbling toward a destination fewer and fewer believed they would reach. Organization had vanished. Regiments mixed together. Officers lost contact with their men. The chain of command existed only in theory. The cold deepened. -20 degrees. -30 at night. Sepoys died in clusters. Their bodies lay in groups where they had huddled together for warmth. The cold took them anyway. British soldiers fared little better. Their wool uniforms were soaked through. Ice formed on their skin. Frostbite spread up their limbs. Black fingers, black toes. The flesh dying before the man did. Brydon amputated when he could. Most of the time he could only watch. Food was gone. The supplies abandoned or stolen. Men ate snow to fill their stomachs. Some chewed on leather straps, boot soles, anything. Horses died. Camels died. Their meat was carved off before the bodies cooled. Eaten raw. Blood freezing on beards. Rumors spread of worse. Bodies found with pieces missing. No one spoke of it directly. No one wanted to. Desperation strips away everything. Dignity. Morality. Humanity itself. What remained was animal. Survival. One more step. One more breath. One more hour. The attacks never stopped. Ghilzai fighters followed the column like wolves following wounded prey. They picked off stragglers. They ambushed small groups. They swept down on the flanks and vanished before retaliation came. The soldiers who still had ammunition fired back. But powder was wet. Flintlocks misfired. Range was too great. They died reaching for weapons that would not save them. At night the attacks intensified. Screams echoed through the darkness. Gunfire flashed. By morning more bodies. The column shrank. Every hour. Every mile. Fewer and fewer remained. January 11th. Jagdalak. Another pass. Another trap. The Afghans had prepared this one carefully. Thorn bushes piled across the road. Branches woven together into barriers 6 feet high. The column stumbled into the obstruction. Stopped. Tried to cut through. From above, the Jaziles opened up. This time it was slaughter. Men fell screaming. Others scrambled over bodies to escape. The barriers caught them. Held them in the killing zone. Captain Thomas Suter was among the survivors. He commanded what remained of the 44th Regiment of Foot. Once they had been a proud unit. Now, fewer than 70 men answered his call. Suter looked at the regimental colors. The flag carried into every battle. The symbol of everything the 44th had been. He could not let it fall into enemy hands. He unwrapped the colors from the pole. Wound them around his body. Beneath his jacket. Against his skin. If he died, the colors would die with him. It was the only victory he could still achieve. The night of January 11th was the last for most. The remnants of the column huddled on a hill near Gandamak. 20 officers. 45 soldiers. A handful of camp followers who had somehow survived. Around them, thousands of Afghan fighters gathered. The end was obvious. Everyone knew it. At dawn, the Afghans sent a messenger. Surrender. Lay down your weapons. You will be spared. The soldiers looked at each other. Some wanted to accept. To end the suffering. To take any chance at survival. The officers refused. Not our weapons, someone said. Not while we can still fight. The 44th Regiment fixed bayonets. They formed a line. Shoulder to shoulder. The last formation they would ever hold. The Afghans charged. What happened at Gandamak lasted less than an hour. The soldiers fired their final rounds. Then fought with bayonets. Then with swords. Then with rocks. Then with bare hands. They died where they stood. One by one. Then all at once. Captain Suter fell. The Afghans swarmed over him. They saw the decorated cloth beneath his jacket. Gold thread. Bright colors. They assumed he was important. A prize worth keeping. They spared him. The colors of the 44th survived because the Afghans mistook them for a nobleman's robes. Suter lived because of a misunderstanding. 64 of his men did not. Their bodies lay on the hillside. Frozen. Stripped. Left for the crows. The 44th Regiment of Foot ceased to exist on that hill. Wiped out to the last fighting man. But the column was not quite finished. Small groups had broken away. Scattered into the hills. Tried to find their own paths to safety. Most were hunted down. Killed. A few were captured. sold into slavery, their fates unknown for years. And one man kept writing, Dr. William Brydon. He was among the last to leave Gandamak, mounted on a wounded pony, his uniform in tatters, his body covered in blood, his own and others. He rode through the darkness, alone, the sounds of killing fading behind him. The pony stumbled. Brydon held on, whispered encouragement, kept moving. Dawn came. He saw figures on the road ahead. Afghans. He had no weapon, no strength left to fight. He kicked the pony forward. Charge. They scattered, perhaps surprised by his madness, perhaps unwilling to waste ammunition on one dying man. He passed through. More miles, more snow, the pony weakening with every step. Then came the final pass, a narrow gap, figures on both sides. Brydon did not slow down. He could not. Stopping meant death. A swordsman stepped into his path, raised his blade, swung. The blade came down toward Brydon's skull. A killing blow. It struck something hard. The impact knocked Brydon sideways. He felt the shock through his whole body. But he did not die. The magazine pouch, the leather ammunition case he had stuffed inside his hat for warmth. The blade had struck the leather, cut through it, but the pouch absorbed enough force to save his skull. Brydon kicked the pony, rode on, blood pouring down his face, half blind, fully exhausted. Behind him, the swordsman did not follow. Perhaps he assumed his blow had been fatal. Perhaps he did not care. Brydon kept riding. January 13, 1842. Late morning. The walls of Jalalabad appeared through the snow. Brydon could barely see them. His vision blurred, his body failing. The sentry spotted him, called the alarm. The gates opened. Soldiers ran out. They caught him as he fell from the saddle, carried him inside. General Sale was there, asking questions. Where is the army? Where are the others? Brydon's answer echoed through history. I am the army. They waited. Sale ordered lanterns lit along the walls. Bugles sounded through the night. Fires burned as beacons. Surely more survivors would come. Surely Brydon was just the first. Nobody else came. For days they watched. They listened. They hoped. The mountains answered with silence. 16,500 had marched from Kabul. One reached Jalalabad. The rest lay scattered across 90 miles of frozen passes. Frozen, slaughtered, forgotten. The greatest military disaster in British history was complete. But the story does not end here. Because Brydon survived. The hostages survived. And empires do not accept humiliation quietly. What happened next would determine whether the disaster taught any lessons at all. Spoiler, it did not. General Sale stood on the walls of Jalalabad for 3 days, watching, waiting, hoping. The lanterns burned through the nights. The bugles sounded every hour. Sentries strained their eyes against the white horizon. Nobody came. A few stragglers appeared in the following weeks. Sepoys who had hidden in caves. Camp followers who had been captured and escaped. Wounded men who had crawled for days through snow and rock. The final count was devastating. Of 4,500 soldiers, fewer than 50 survived. Most of those as prisoners. Of 12,000 camp followers, perhaps 100 lived. Scattered, traumatized. Many sold into slavery across Central Asia. 16,500 people had walked out of Kabul. The mountains had swallowed almost everyone. In London, the news arrived like a thunderbolt. The British Empire had suffered defeats before, but nothing like this. An entire army, erased. In 7 days, Parliament erupted. Questions demanded. Blame assigned. Careers destroyed. Lord Auckland, the Governor-General who had ordered the invasion, was recalled in disgrace. He returned to England a broken man. Died within 2 years. Some said from shame. Others said his heart simply gave out under the weight of 16,500 ghosts. Elphinstone never faced judgment. He died in Afghan captivity. Sick. Broken. Perhaps mercifully unaware of how history would remember him. The generals who survived wrote their memoirs. They blamed the weather, the terrain, the treachery of Akbar Khan. Anything but themselves. The official story took shape. A tragic defeat. Unavoidable circumstances. Lessons learned. But here is what the official story left out. The disaster was not unavoidable. It was manufactured. Every critical failure traced back to human decisions. Human arrogance. Human blindness. The decision to invade a country nobody understood. The decision to install a king nobody wanted. The decision to cut subsidies that kept the passes safe. The decision to ignore every warning from men who knew better. The decision to put Elphinstone in command. The decision to negotiate from weakness. The decision to trust promises made by enemies. The decision to march in January. Any one of these mistakes might have been survivable. Together, they created a trap from which escape was impossible. The British did not lose to Afghanistan. They lost to themselves. But here is the part that should make you pause. The hostages survived. Lady Sale, Captain Souter, dozens of officers and their families. Akbar Khan kept them alive. Not out of kindness, not out of mercy, out of calculation. Hostages were leverage, bargaining chips. As long as the British wanted them back, Akbar had power. But there was something else. Something the British never understood. Pashtunwali, the code of the Pashtun. The ancient laws that governed Afghan society. Honor, hospitality, revenge. Once someone became your prisoner, your guest, the code demanded protection. Even if you had killed their countrymen hours before. Even if you hated everything they represented. Akbar Khan was a warrior, a killer. He had orchestrated the destruction of an army. But he was also Pashtun. The code bound him. The hostages were fed, sheltered, treated with respect. Lady Sale wrote in her diary of Afghan women bringing her food, sharing their fires, showing kindness she had not expected. The British called the Afghans barbarians. Yet the Afghans followed a code of honor that their captors could not comprehend. This was the cultural blindness that doomed the invasion from the start. The British saw savages to be conquered. They never saw people with their own laws, their own logic, their own definition of right and wrong. You cannot defeat an enemy you refuse to understand. The empire demanded revenge. In April 1842, General George Pollock assembled a relief force. Fresh troops from India, artillery, cavalry, everything the original garrison had lacked. He marched through the passes that had consumed Elphinstone's army. This time the British came prepared. Flanking parties secured the heights before the main column advanced. No ambushes, no traps. Pollock reached Jalalabad, reinforced the garrison, then pushed on to Kabul. The city fell in September. Akbar Khan fled into the mountains, just as his father had 4 years earlier. The British rescued the hostages. Lady Sale embraced her husband. The survivors told their stories. Then came the reckoning. Pollock ordered the Grand Bazaar of Kabul destroyed. The great market where Macnaghten's body had been displayed. Where Burns' head had rotted on a pike. They burned it to the ground. Not justice. Revenge. The empire needed a victory to erase the humiliation. They settled for ashes. But here is the truth that the victory parade could not hide. The British did not stay. Within weeks of burning the bazaar, Pollock's army marched back to India. They took the hostages. They took the loot. They left Afghanistan exactly as they had found it. Dost Muhammad, the king they had deposed in 1839, returned to power. He ruled for another 20 years. Outlived almost everyone who had tried to remove him. Shah Shuja, the puppet king, was already dead. Assassinated by his own people months before Pollock arrived. 3 years of war. Tens of thousands of deaths. Millions of pounds spent. And Afghanistan ended precisely where it started. The only difference was the bones in the passes. The widows in England and India. The children who grew up without fathers. The empire learned nothing. What should they have learned? The question haunted military strategists for decades. Some answered with tactics. Better supply lines. Better winter gear. Better intelligence. These answers missed the point. The lesson was not about logistics. It was about something deeper. Something empires refuse to accept. Some places cannot be held. Not because the people are stronger, Not because the terrain is impossible, but because the will to resist never breaks. Afghanistan had resisted the Persians, the Greeks, the Mongols, the Mughals. Each invader arrived believing they were different. Each left diminished. The British joined the list. They would not be the last. Pause with me for a moment. You've been watching for a while now. And if this story has shown you something new, about history, about power, about the cost of arrogance, I need your help. Share this video. Not for me. For the 16,499 who never came home. Their names are mostly lost. Their stories reduced to statistics. But what happened to them matters. It matters because it keeps happening. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you think. Did the British deserve what happened? Was there any way to avoid it? What would you have done differently? And if you want more stories like this, the hidden history that textbooks bury, subscribe. Hit the bell. Join me for the next one. Now, let me show you why this story still matters today. 1979. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. Different century. Different empire. Same mistake. The Soviets came with tanks. Helicopters. The most powerful military in the communist world. They installed a puppet government in Kabul. They believed they could crush the resistance in months. They stayed for 10 years. The Mujahideen, holy warriors, fought from the mountains. The same mountains where Elphinstone's army had frozen. The same passes where the 44th made its last stand. The Soviets had better weapons than the British. Better technology. Better logistics. None of it mattered. They lost 15,000 soldiers. Killed perhaps 1 million Afghans. Spent billions of rubles. And in the end they left. February 1989. The last Soviet soldier crossed the bridge out of Afghanistan. Behind him, a country in ruins. Ahead, an empire that would collapse within 2 years. Afghanistan did not cause the fall of the Soviet Union, but it weakened it, drained it, exposed its limits. The graveyard of empires had claimed another victim. 2001. The United States invades Afghanistan. The justification was different. September 11th. Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden hiding in the mountains. The initial campaign succeeded brilliantly. The Taliban fell within weeks. A new government took power in Kabul. Victory declared. Mission accomplished. Except it was not. The war continued. Year after year. The Taliban never disappeared. They retreated to the mountains. To Pakistan. To the villages where the central government could not reach. American soldiers patrolled the same passes. Fought in the same valleys. Died in the same ambushes. 20 years. 2,400 American dead. Over 100,000 Afghans killed. Trillions of dollars spent. And in August 2021, the last American soldiers flew out of Kabul airport. Behind them, the Taliban marched back into the capital. The government the Americans had built collapsed in 11 days. Faster than anyone predicted. Faster than seemed possible. The scenes were hauntingly familiar. Desperate crowds at the airport. Helicopters lifting off from rooftops. A superpower retreating from a war it could not win. Different century. Different flag. Same ending. Why does this keep happening? The question has no simple answer. But pattern offers clues. Every invader arrives with superior technology. Superior firepower. Superior confidence. Every invader underestimates the land itself. The mountains that swallow armies. The winters that kill without mercy. The passes that become traps. Every invader underestimates the people. Their patience. Their memory. Their willingness to suffer. The Afghans do not need to win battles. They only need to endure. To wait. To outlast. Empires think in years. Afghans think in generations. The British came and left. The Soviets came and left. The Americans came and left. The mountains remain. Dr. William Brydon lived. He returned to England. Resumed his medical career. Married. Had children. Lived into old age. But he never escaped the passes. He woke at night. Sweating. Screaming. Seeing the faces of the dead. Hearing the Jaziles crack. Feeling the cold that had killed 16,499 others. He rarely spoke of the retreat. When asked, he gave brief answers. Clinical. Detached. Only once did he reveal what the experience had cost him. I see them still, he told a friend. Every night. Walking into the snow. And I cannot save them. The painter Elizabeth Butler immortalized him. Her canvas remnants of an army shows a single rider on an exhausted horse. Slumped. Broken. The walls of Jalalabad in the distance. The painting became famous. A symbol of imperial disaster. A warning in oils. But the painting shows only one man. It cannot show the 16,499 who did not make it. The wives. The children. The soldiers. The servants. They have no painting. No monument. Most have no graves. Only the mountains remember them. So what does this story mean for you? You are not commanding an army. You are not invading a foreign land. You are not making decisions that will kill thousands. But the lessons apply. Arrogance destroys. The British believed they could not fail. They ignored every warning. They trusted their own superiority. They died for it. Listen to the people who know. Alexander Burns understood Afghanistan. Nobody listened to him. He was right. They were wrong. Thousands died because wisdom was ignored. Negotiating from weakness gets you nothing. Elphinstone had no leverage. His agreements were worthless. When you have nothing to offer, promises mean nothing. Survival sometimes comes down to small things. A magazine pouch. Piece of leather. The difference between life and death can be absurdly tiny. Preparation matters. Luck matters more. And finally, some fights cannot be won. Not every hill is worth dying on. Not every battle is worth fighting. Knowing when to walk away is not weakness. It is wisdom. The British should have walked away in 1840, when they still could, before the passes filled with their dead. They did not. And 16,499 paid the price. We started with a sentry on a wall, watching the snow, seeing a shape emerge from the white. We end with the same image, because history does not move forward. It circles. January 13, 1842. A man rides out of a massacre, collapses at the gates, speaks 3 words that echo through centuries. I am the army. He was not supposed to survive. A sword should have killed him. A piece of leather said otherwise. 16,500 marched into the mountains. 1 limped home. The passes are quiet now. Snow falls every winter. Melts every spring. Sometimes bones still emerge from the thaw. Buttons. Belt buckles. The remnants of an army that believed it could not be beaten. Afghanistan remembers. The question is whether anyone else does. The next time you hear about a powerful nation entering a land it does not understand, remember this story. Remember Elphinstone, unable to decide. Remember Macnaghten, trusting his enemies. Remember Burns, warning no one would hear. Remember the sepoys, freezing in uniforms meant for other climates. Remember the children, dying in their mother's arms. Remember Brydon, riding alone through the white. And remember the lesson written in blood across 90 miles of mountain passes. Some lands do not bend. Some people do not break. Some graves never fill. 16,500 entered. 1 returned. The mountains are still waiting. This has been Dark History Exhumed. And now you know what they never taught you.